I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to show you how curiosity without caution can open the wrong door. For true stories, one rule: stay curious, stay careful. You've probably heard of Annabelle, right? That creepy doll locked away by paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. But the real story behind her is even stranger than the movies. And I promise, it's not something you'd want sitting on your shelf at night. I'm telling this as I'd say it to a friend, calmly, because drama doesn't help when the facts are already eerie. The doll itself doesn't look scary at all. The original Annabelle is a simple, raggedy, and-stitched smile. Button eyes, soft cloth, yet this harmless look is exactly what makes the story unnerving. Evil that wears a friendly face is harder to see coming. That detail sticks with me, and it sets the tone for everything that follows: ordinary objects carrying unordinary weight. It all began in the early 1970s, when two nursing students, Donna and Angie, got the doll as a gift. At first it felt like a cute apartment mascot, then odd things happened. A leg slightly turned, a head tilted, a chair scuffed. Little changes easy to excuse until they weren't. To me, that's the seed of the fear. Tiny shifts that build trust in your own doubt before you even realize it. I would have shrugged it off too, but the doll kept showing up where no one left it. One afternoon it sat by the door as if it had been waiting. Another day it moved from the bedroom to the living room while everyone was out. That quiet persistence is what digs under your skin. You can roll your eyes at one odd moment, but a pattern is harder to laugh off. When it trails you room to room, then the notes appeared: tiny scraps of parchment that said, "Help me." The roommates didn't even own parchment paper. It felt like someone was playing a joke, except the apartment was locked and nothing else was disturbed. That's when prank became possibility. That's the moment curiosity turns into caution, and once you feel that pivot, every creak in the floor gets louder. One boyfriend claimed the doll attacked him in his sleep. He woke with shallow scratches across his chest, arranged like a warning. I'm not saying a toy did it, but the timing rattled everyone. When coincidences start stacking in the dark, I pay attention. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to point at the breadcrumb trail that made level-headed people rethink the room. Enter Ed and Lorraine Warren, already famous for chasing the strange. Their take was blunt. The doll wasn't haunted. It was being used, manipulated by something inhuman. Not a child spirit, not a harmless hitchhiker, but a presence that wanted permission to move closer. That framework, something using something else, explains why the case feels less like a toy story and more like strategy. The Warrens believed the entity pretended to be a little girl to earn sympathy. And once you invite a thing like that in, even with kindness, it doesn't just stay for tea. It tests boundaries, it asks for more, and eventually, it aims for you. I always say, predators study us first. If it is what they thought, kindness would have been the very bait it needed. To stop the spiral, the Warrens removed the doll and sealed it in a glass case lined with prayers. On the front, a stern sign: warning. Positively, do not open. I don't blame them. A locked door is a promise to yourself as much as a barrier to anything else. Boundaries are storytelling tools too. A case is a plot twist with hinges. It says no for the times you might say yes. People still visit the Warrens' occult museum and swear the air changes near that case heavy or prickly, like a storm is about to break. Some who mocked the doll reportedly had bad luck on the drive home. Coincidence is possible, contempt isn't armor. I filed those reports under take the hint, because bravado is cheap and bad luck is expensive on a highway at night. I'm not here to prove anything to you. I'm here to share why this story endures. Annabelle isn't just a prop in a franchise. She is a mirror for the fear that something unseen can influence the scene, that belief itself can open doors best left closed. Stories survive because they teach us how to walk in the dark without running. That's why this one refuses to fade. The Conjuring films stitched this history into a larger tapestry: haunted homes, cursed artifacts, and a couple determined to face both. But what hooks me isn't the jump scares. It's the idea that love and faith, when stubborn enough, can hold the line. Courage here isn't loud, it's precise. It's the kind that shows up with a toolbox of rituals and closes windows. Ed and Lorraine were imperfect people, sure, but they kept showing up where others ran. Whether you see them as heroes, storytellers, or skilled counselors, their work gave frightened families language for the chaos. Sometimes a name for the dark is the first light. Even if you doubt their view, you can respect the service. Frightened neighbors slept better after a knock and a prayer. Back to the doll. I imagine the case at night, the museum quiet, the glass reflecting its stitched grin. There's no dramatic music there, only the hum of electricity and old wood settling. Fear thrives in silence because silence lets your mind answer the questions. Silence is the best sound design. It lets your heartbeat do the scoring, while the camera simply refuses to blink. Skeptics say the story's marketing. Believers point to scars, and priests in case files. I live somewhere in between. I think people experience something real, and the labels arrive later. What matters is the pattern. Invite, escalate, and then a price to pay. Whatever side you land on, you'll agree the escalation chart looks the same. Invite, signs, strain, and unintended debt. Annabelle's legend works because it flips expectations. We fear monsters with teeth, not toys with smiles. but soft things can hold sharp stories. Think about it. What's more dangerous than danger that looks safe? You won't notice it until it's close. The subversion works because trust is the first door we open. Once it swings, closing it takes more than a shrug. If you're wondering what the Warrens actually did, it wasn't wild theatrics. It was boundaries, sacred objects, prayers, and strict rules. Keep the case locked. Don't taunt, don't touch. Most hauntings, like most dramas, feed on attention and access. In my book, rules are compassion in advance. They protect future you from the version that thinks it's bulletproof. I've walked through old houses where history lingers like a draft. You can feel when a room remembers. That's the mood Annabelle brings. Memory that refuses to fade, a story that keeps asking to be told, even when everyone is tired of telling it. That's why legends have so much breath in them. They're memories with spine, bending but not breaking as they pass along. The museum is closed now, and the artifacts live in storage. But the doll's myth didn't stop. It migrated online videos, testimonies, warnings. The internet gave the case what the entity always wanted. More eyes, more belief, more energy to push against. Algorithms love a ghost, but attention is a current. If you wade too deep, it will pull. The shore is the smarter view. I try to be responsible when sharing these stories. Fear spreads faster than facts. So here's my line. Curiosity is healthy. Invitations are not. Learn the history, respect the boundary, and don't play brave with things built to make you doubt yourself. I'll never tell you what to believe. I'll just remind you that boundaries are cheaper than exorcisms. Whatever you call them, there's a reason the films keep returning to faith. Whether or not your religious rituals are architecture for the mind, they say, this is safe, and this is not. Annabelle challenges that map, and that's why the case becomes more than wood and glass. Rituals, at minimum, are reminders. They're the sticky notes of the soul that say, stay here, when the mind wanders. A detail I love. The priest who blessed the case reportedly warned visitors to keep distance. It wasn't about theatrics. It was about consent. You can stand near a cliff without falling, but you still respect the edge. The case is an edge. Consent is the hidden chapter in every haunting. Doors aren't just wood. They're choices, and choices have gravity. Some ask why the Warrens didn't just destroy the doll, but most traditions say you don't smash a vessel that holds a problem. You contain it. Break the jar, you spill what's inside. A case isn't mercy, it's strategy. Containment is a form of respect. It admits the unknown and refuses to escalate it for entertainment value. I've talked to museum goers who admitted they expected spectacle lights flickering, glass rattling. Instead they felt nothing but pressure, like a hand on the shoulder reminding them to behave. Not proof, exactly, but the kind of nudge that lingers. That hush matters. When a room convinces you to behave, you're already inside the genre, whether or not you clap for it. Let's address the obvious. Movies dramatize. The Conjuring universe magnifies events for story beats, but underneath the jump scares are kernels pulled from interviews, police notes, and pastoral logs, breadcrumbs that kept the legends from blowing away. Breadcrumbs don't equal proof, but they do make a path. Walk it slowly, and you'll notice how many people took the same steps. I don't need you to believe everything. I'm asking you to consider the cost of disbelief. If a house full of witnesses says a thing happened, either they all lied, all misread the same signs, or something unusual gathered them into one story. Any option is interesting. Doubt has bills too. Dismissing everyone outright often costs more than pausing long enough to listen well. Annabelle's real power is cultural. She made a generation rehearse caution. Don't mock, don't touch, don't invite. Even if the worst parts are inflated, the habits they teach humility. Boundaries aren't bad things to carry into a dark room. Even if all you gain is better manners around the uncanny, that's still a net win in a noisy, reckless world. The Warrens cataloged many cursed objects, a music box, a mirror, a bridal gown, said to move on its own. The doll wasn't alone, it was a node in a larger web. That's how the films treat it. Tua, shared universe of uncanny artifacts and unfinished business. Webs are how stories travel. Pull one thread, and you'll feel the tug from a dozen other rooms you've never seen. Every time I revisit this story, I think about how belief changes behavior. A locked case changes how you walk in a room. A warning sign changes your tone. Even skeptics lower their voice without noticing. The ritual works whether you buy the reason or not. Etiquette changes outcomes. Whispering isn't superstition. It's a way of saying, I acknowledge what I don't control. Some people ask if I'd ever film with the doll. Hard pass. Content isn't worth consequences, even hypothetical ones. There's a line between telling a story and trying to make the story notice you. I prefer the first, and I sleep better for it. I make videos, not invitations. Telling is safe. Summoning is the hobby for people who prefer lessons the hard way. The do not open sign isn't melodrama, it's etiquette. You don't have to agree with a rule to honor it. When a community builds a boundary around something, it's wise to read the room. Curiosity gets better results when it travels with respect. If you borrow a boundary, you borrow wisdom. Someone paid tuition so you don't have to. Take the scholarship, The case files mentioned a medium who tried to read the doll and left shaken. Maybe performance, maybe genuine shock, but here's the thing, the effect was the same. Everyone went home quieter. Sometimes mystery doesn't solve a problem, it just slows it down. Performances end, patterns endure. When the curtain drops and people are still careful, that's a clue worth keeping. The Conjuring stands out because it treats terror like a family problem, something that hits dinner tables, bedrooms, and prayer circles. The hauntings are dramatic, yes, but the cure is ordinary. People checking on each other, refusing to give up. Family is where fear shows its teeth. That's why help often looks boring, blankets, lamps on, and someone staying. When I tell this story on camera, I keep the tone steady. No sensational gore, no cheap shocks. The fear lives in suggestion. A moved chair, a cold spot, a note that wasn't there yesterday. We're wired to notice patterns, and patterns are spooky enough. Suggestion is a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. It cuts cleaner, and it lets your imagination do the dignified work. Annabelle isn't famous for big scenes. She's famous for small ones that accumulate. You don't fear a single footstep. You fear the second, the third, the proof that you are not alone. That's the rhythm these cases, exploits off repetition until belief bends. Repetition is the drumbeat of dread, small, steady, and suddenly everywhere you turn your head. Plenty of magicians and debunkers have explanations, ideomotor effects, drafts, confirmation bias. I listen to them because explanations are anchors, but even anchors drag in bad weather. When testimony piles up, I leave a little room for the ocean. I keep space for science and for lived stories. My only rule is simple, neither gets to bully the other. Here, essay thought that helps me sleep. The people who guard the doll do so quietly. They aren't throwing parties around the case. Their caution reads sincere. You can fake a lot of things, but long-term restraint is hard to counterfeit. Restraint is underrated content. Quiet caretaking doesn't farm clicks, but it keeps people out of ambulances. Why does a story like this keep growing? Because it lets us rehearse bravery. We stare at the glass and decide who we are. The skeptic, the believer, the jokester, the cautious friend. The choice is the point, and the doll is just the mirror. The mirror metaphor works because the risk is personal. What you bring to the glass is what looks back at you. If you've ever felt watched in an empty room, you already understand half this tale. Call it psychology if you want. The label doesn't change the pulse in your throat. Annabelle is an elegant shortcut to that feeling, packaged as fabric and thread. We're animals built for pattern spotting, and sometimes the pattern is simply your nerves being on time to the party. I think about the roommates who started all this, students tired, probably laughing between exams. Their lives changed because a gift wouldn't sit still. That's horror at its most intimate. The moment ordinary refuses to be ordinary, breaking rank is the moment the world feels less negotiated and more wild. That's the part I never forget. Another reason the legend lives. Consequences. Stories warn that mockers stumble, that rules broken have a price. You don't need curses for that. Hubris delivers reliably. The doll just gives the lesson a face you'll remember. Folklore is just memory with a chorus. It repeats until the lesson fits in your pocket and walks you home. The priest's car story gets told a lot the near accident after teasing the doll. Whether embellished or not, it reads like folklore does. A quick slap on the wrist from the universe. Drive safe, speak softly, and don't tap the glass. Whether apocryphal or not, the rhythm of that near miss teaches faster than a lecture ever could. The Conjuring films made room for grief. So many hauntings begin with loss, with a family already cracked by stress. Maybe that's why the rituals work. They rebuild a sense that someone is listening, that chaos can be named and negotiated with. Grief opens windows. Good rituals close the ones that let weather in and leave the ones for light. As for the museum, think of it like a library of cautionary tales. Each object is a chapter, and the cases are the bindings. You don't rip out pages just because you hate the ending. You keep them shelved, readable, and contained. A museum of warnings is still a public service. You learn where the railings go by noticing where they've been built. I'm often asked what scares me most about Annabelle. It's not the scratches or whispers, it's the way the story recruits you. The moment you care enough to share it, you've given it a little more life. That's power quiet, patient, contagious. Stories want listeners. Forces want fuel. I'm happy to be the former and stingy about the latter. So here's my rule of thumb. Ask questions, gather sources, but treat haunted reputations like live wires. You don't have to touch to learn the lesson. Observation is safer than participation, and skepticism works best when it's humble. Curiosity with a helmet is my motto. Ask everything, touch almost nothing, and thank whoever built the fence. The line between legend and logbook is blurry here. I've seen scans of notes, heard recordings, met people who wish they hadn't gone near that case. None of it is courtroom proof, but together it paints a picture that's hard to shrug off. Collage the clues, and what you get isn't a verdict but a vibe coherent enough to change your choices. If you've made it this far, you're part of the long chain keeping this tale alive. That's not a warning, it's an invitation to handle it well. Share it with context, don't chase stunts. Let curiosity lead, but let wisdom set the limits. You're the steward now, because attention is stewardship. Use it with the kind of care you wish others had. In the end, Annabelle is a story about thresholds, doorways we cross with our minds before our bodies follow. The case is one threshold. Your attention is another. I respect both, which is why I'm telling this from a safe distance. Thresholds demand posture, shoulders down, eyes open, and a healthy respect for enough for today. When the credits roll on these tales, I don't want you terrified. I want you thoughtful. Fear fades. Have it stick. If this legend trains you to pause before inviting the unknown, then it's earned its keep without taking a single night of sleep. Good horror leaves you practical. If you leave with better boundaries than you came with, we did this right. After the haunted calm of Annabelle's glass case, let us step into a myth born online, where a crowd-invented figure slipped off the screen and collided with real life. The Slender Man case. You probably know the headline. 2 12-year-olds led a friend into the woods because they thought a faceless figure from the internet demanded it. I'm not retelling this to shock you. I want us to slow down, look closely, and understand how a story built for thrills slipped its leash and became a caution sign for the digital age. Before the crime, Slender Man was a crowd-made monster. Tall, blank-faced, suit like a funeral, arms like branches. He was born on a forum, fed by fan art and fiction, a sandbox where fear could play without consequences. That was the point, make-believe. But repetition can sand down the word fiction, until some minds miss the label entirely. I'm not blaming a meme for human choices, but context matters. When you swim long enough in a story that rewards belief, the water starts to feel like air. Kids test boundaries. Myths offer scripts. Slender Man was a script with an audience, a role that promised protection if you proved loyalty. That promise, imagined or not, was the spark that burned. The girls weren't villains in a movie, they were kids marinating in a narrative. They read threads, swapped theories, and convinced themselves they were characters on a mission. That's the part that chills me, the way fandom can turn into a feedback loop, where doubt sounds rude and certainty feels like belonging. Belonging is a powerful drug. The plan wasn't a sudden storm, it brewed. There were conversations, little rehearsals of bravery, secret agreements. None of this excuses harm. It explains how ordinary days can slide toward a cliff without anyone noticing the ground changing under their shoes. Slopes are sneaky. You don't see the drop until the horizon tilts in your stomach. In the woods, the story tried to write itself in flesh. I won't linger on the details. That's not why we're here. What matters is that the victim, against every odd, survived and found help. Survival is the only part I want to underline. When we tell true horror, we center the living, not the spectacle. That's my rule, and I'm keeping it here. Afterward, the town felt the kind of silence that follows a fire alarm, the ringing in your ears. The disbelief, the hard questions. Parents looked at screens with new suspicion. Teachers scanned essays for new subtext. The internet, which had been a playground, suddenly looked like a forest, with paths that went places no one had mapped. The media did what media does. It amplified the most dramatic angle. You know the montage, blurred faces, ominous music, headlines about internet evil. I get it, fear travels well, but panic rarely teaches. What we needed, and still need, is digital literacy with teeth. Not scolding, but tools for telling legend from lure before it asks for proof. Here's the uncomfortable part. Belief isn't a joke. Your brain is a pattern machine, and when isolation, anxiety, or loyalty mix with a compelling narrative, patterns can harden into instructions. That's not a flaw, it's human wiring. The fix isn't shame, it's better maps, clearer labels, and communities that reward questions instead of dares. Investigators peeled back browsers and notebooks and found the breadcrumb trail. Drawings, plans, whispers dressed as courage. Again, no gory recaps from me. The point is how the myth provided roles: the enforcer, the witness, the sacrifice. When a story offers you a part that makes fear feel purposeful, it can hijack your judgment in quiet steps. Courts stepped in, as they must, and the case entered that careful space where law, psychology, and childhood collide. The outcomes focused on mental health, safety, and the long road back from a day that went terribly wrong. I'm not here to relitigate it. I'm here to say that accountability and compassion can live in the same sentence. The survivor's strength deserves the headline. She recovered, rebuilt, and kept going. That should be the drumbeat of any retelling. When you center resilience, you deny the myth the last word. Fear loves the spotlight, recovery steals it back. If this story teaches anything, it's that light isn't louder than dark, but it outlasts it. Let's talk about the ecosystem that fed the legend. Slender Man wasn't a single author's gospel. It was open-source dread. Forums, wikis, video series. H1 embroidered the suit. That's creative, and most of it stayed play. But openness cuts both ways. Without guardrails, the same creativity can become a maze with exits that look like entrances. I don't say this to scold the internet earnestly. I love the internet. It's where we share, learn, and laugh at 2 a.m. I'm saying myths aren't harmless just because they're homemade. When a crowd builds a monster, the crowd should also build warnings. We need cultural captions. This is fiction. Enjoy responsibly. Think of it as fear with seatbelts. The case rattled adults because it exposed a blind spot. We taught kids to cross streets, not streams of content. We warned about strangers, not strange ideas. The fix isn't banning stories. It's teaching story sense. Ask, who wrote this? What do they want from me? What happens if I say no? Those questions are flashlights, and flashlights disrupt rumors. People asked, could this happen here? The honest answer is that stories travel anywhere. There's Wi-Fi and loneliness. But hope travels too. Mentors, clubs, art, sports, these are narrative anchors that compete with darker scripts. Belonging can be borrowed from better places. If we don't offer strong communities, weak myths will volunteer. I keep thinking about the word proof. The kids wanted to prove themselves to something that only exists if you feed it attention. That's the trap. Attention is fuel, and the scariest monsters run on it. If I could teach one lesson, it'd this. You done, T.O.? Any idea your obedience just because it's persistent? Persistence isn't authority. Some commentators blamed horror as a genre. I don't buy that. Horror can be a safe rehearsal space when it's framed as fiction. The problem was the erosion of that frame. When boundaries blur, training becomes temptation. So let's protect the stage. Stories in the theater, choices in real life. Enjoy the mask, but hang it up when the credits roll. The case also forced platforms to look in the mirror. Moderation can't catch every thread, but it can set norms. Content warnings, educational sidebars, links to resources. These aren't buzzkill moves. They're scaffolding. If a platform profits from a myth, it can also provide the railing that keeps the audience from tumbling off the balcony. Parents asked for signs to watch. I'm no clinician, but patterns matter. Isolation that deepens. New secrecy. Sudden devotion to a story that punishes dissent. If a narrative demands hurting someone to prove loyalty, that's not fandom, that's a fire alarm. Step in early. Be curious, not combative, and widen the world the child is standing in. Teachers told me they felt unprepared. Fair. Curriculum catches up slow, but small steps help. Assign media projects that unpack how myths are made, compare sources, and map how communities police their own lore. Give students a toolkit for building and dismantling narratives. Teach them to be both audience and editor when fear knocks. I'll say this plainly. Most kids who love spooky fiction never harm anyone. They write, they roleplay, they scare themselves a little, and then sleep fine. The issue isn't taste. It's isolation plus a story that punishes questions. Curiosity is the cure. If a tale can't survive being examined, it doesn't deserve to be carried like a rulebook. In the legal aftermath, the focus shifted to treatment and time. The system tried to balance safety with the understanding that young minds can heal and change. That balance is messy, but it matters. We hold people accountable, and we also hold space for growth. Those two grips are how a society keeps its footing after a collective stumble. The community built new rituals. Assemblies about online myths, parent meetups, counselors trained in internet culture. It sounds small until you see relief on a face that finally has language for what felt unsayable. Language is medicine. Once you can describe the fog, you can drive through it without swerving toward the worst possible exit. Meanwhile, the Slender Man legend didn't vanish. It adapted, as stories do. But the tone changed. More creators added disclaimers, more fans drew the line between cosplay and commitment. That's progress. Culture is a thermostat. When it senses harm, it can nudge the temperature toward safer. That shift didn't fix everything, but it helped. Let's give the survivor one more moment, choosing to speak, to heal, to live a full life. That's the counterspell to any myth that worships fear. We don't name her here out of respect, but her path matters more than any villain's silhouette. If you're telling this story on your channel, keep your lens on courage. It's the better close-up. I'm often asked whether Slender Man is real. Here's my answer. Ideas are real in the way weather is real. You can't hold a storm, but you feel its pressure and plan around it. The healthier our shelters, family, friends, mentors, the less damage a sudden squall can do. Build good roofs. And when the sky darkens, cancel the picnic, not the neighborhood. A tough truth. Algorithms favor extremes because extremes are sticky. That means a kid dabbling in spooky lore can be guided, step by click, toward harder edges. Interruption is kindness here. Recommend art, games, or creators who treat fear as fiction and community as the point. Trade escalation for craft. Swap dares for discussions. When I cover cases like this, I refuse to glamorize the harm. We don't need reenactments or breathless maps. We need empathy and clear thinking. If there's a villain I'll name, it's the lie that everyone is doing it. They aren't. Most people choose kindness when they can see it clearly. Make kindness visible. That's how you lower the room's pulse. Some will say the kids were just looking for control in a messy world. I get that. Control is tempting. Myth offers simple rules, even if the price is terrible. Reality's rules are slower but kinder. Talk to someone, ask for help, wait a day. Slower doesn't trend, but it saves. The internet can be instant. Healing rarely is. I keep circling back to friendship. Real friendship doesn't demand rituals of harm. It doesn't tax your conscience or trap you in secrets that make your stomach hurt. If a friend hands you a map that heads into the woods and won't take questions, drop the map. That's not betrayal, that's self-respect. Good friends will walk you back to the road. Police reports and court days made headlines, but the quiet work took longer. Therapy sessions, family dinners with new rules, teachers rewriting assignments, librarians curating safer horror. That's the unglamorous heroism I respect. Culture isn't changed by a speech. It's changed by 100 small check-ins that keep a door from drifting open. I won't pretend there's a tidy bow here. Some scars stay, but scars are maps of survival, not souvenirs of failure. When a community learns to talk about how stories work, it becomes harder for any single story to hijack a kid's compass. That doesn't erase the past. It makes a future where fewer parents whisper, "How did we miss it?" At 3 a.m., let's zoom out. Humans have always told scary stories. Campfires became comment sections. Legends grew wings. The difference now is speed and reach. That means our responsibility scales too. If we create fear, we also curate it. If we share a myth, we also share the safety rails. That's not censorship, that's craftsmanship. I like to end with practical steps. If a narrative online makes you feel chosen but also trapped, pause. If it punishes questions, leave. If it asks for proof that risks harm, report and reroute. Replace the tab with one that builds you. Music, art, a tutorial, a text to someone who knows your laugh. You deserve stories that return you safely. For creators like me, tone is everything. We can cover real cases without turning suffering into spectacle. We can choose language that centers healing, cites verified info, and refuses clickbait, cruelty. Views that cost someone else's dignity are too expensive. Let's make content that a survivor could watch without flinching. The Slender Man case isn't about a monster in the trees. It's about the stories we let inside. Doors aren't just wood. They're attention. Guard yours. When something demands fear as the price of admission, try curiosity instead. Ask where the exits are. Ask who benefits if you panic. Questions are keys that jingle loud enough to wake you up. Law enforcement, counselors, and judges each played their part. The aim wasn't revenge, it was guardrails. Treatment plans, supervised release, conditions that protect the public and the people who made disastrous choices. Justice here looks like prevention, not spectacle. Prevention rarely trends, but it's where real safety lives. If you're a parent watching this, here's a script. I'm not mad. I'm interested. Show me the stories you love. Curate together. Praise the creators who label fiction clearly. Build in off-ramps for intense content. Make home the place where curiosity is safe and secrecy gets less shiny. Boredom isn't the enemy. Loneliness is. If you're a teen hearing this, I promise, you don't need a myth to make you special. You're already one of one. Any story that threatens your safety to prove loyalty is selling you something you don't need. Real belonging never invoices you in fear. The bravest move online is often the most boring. Closing the tab and texting someone kind. Communities heal by remembering wisely. That means honoring the survivor's privacy, resisting rumors, and refusing to turn tragedy into a campfire dare. Tell the truth, skip the gore, and move the spotlight to resilience. If a retelling leaves you heavy but hopeful, you did it right. Heavy because harm happened. Hopeful because we can do better. I keep a line taped above my desk. Myth is a guest. I decide who stays. Maybe put that on your phone. The stories we host shape our rooms. If a guest starts rearranging furniture, ask them to leave. Your attention is rent, charge fairly. The internet is a city. Pick good neighborhoods. And if you get lost, ask for directions without shame. The aftermath included real apologies, long treatment, and supervised steps toward normal life. That's not a headline, it's a calendar. Healing looks like repetition. Safe choices, check-ins, routines that rebuild trust brick by careful brick. It's not cinematic, but it's how families breathe again without listening for the worst. Every evening, I won't name the kids here, on purpose. They've lived under enough labels. This is a story about systems and culture, not a true crime trading card. If our curiosity costs someone else their chance at a quiet life, we're spending compassion badly. Let's invest in understanding, not voyeurism. Curiosity can mind its manners and still be brave. Imagine a version of this tale where the myth failed because the questions were louder. That's my goal in telling it this way, not to terrify you, but to tune your ear. When narratives try to sprint past your thinking, make them jog. Fear hates pace control. The moment you slow it down, it trips over its own laces. Earlier, with Annabelle, we talked about boundaries, glass cases, warning signs. Here, the boundary is softer, but just as real. Critical distance. You don't need glass if you have perspective. Perspective is the portable case you carry into every story, every rumor, every prove it dare. Keep it latched. You're safer than you think. One last note on creators. The best horror makers I know cherish consent. They label, they warn, they respect the exit door. That's why their audiences come back. Safety doesn't kill the mood. It builds trust, and trust lets you tell bolder tales without losing the room. That's the kind of culture I want my channel to help normalize. As we close, hold two truths. The internet can nurture kindness at scale, and it can amplify harm in a heartbeat. Our job isn't to flee it, it's to furnish it better norms, Kinder replies. Smarter content. The Slender Man case is a mile marker reminding us to keep both hands on the wheel. That reminder is worth repeating out loud. If you've stayed with me through this, thank you. You've just practiced the skill that keeps stories from steering you. Attention with intention. Pass it on. Check on a friend who loves scary lore. Recommend creators who handle it with care. And remember, the scariest myths fade when a community chooses to tell a better one together. Here's the takeaway I carry. Curiosity is healthy, but it owes nothing to danger. The next time a legend knocks and promises you status for a price, let it knock. You've got better invitations. Close the tab, open a window, take a walk, send a text. Make some art. That's how you leave the woods without pretending they never existed. From an online myth-testing reality, let S step into a courtroom where belief collided with the law. The Arn Cheyenne Johnson case nicknamed, For Better or Worse, The Devil Made Me Do It. You've heard how an online legend spilled into real life in the Slender Man case? Now I want to step into a courtroom where belief collided with the law. The Arn Cheyenne Johnson story, better known by a headline built to echo forever. The devil made me do it. I'm not here to sensationalize it. I'm here to walk slowly, translate the noise, and ask what the justice system can hold and what it simply can't. Before the trial, there was a family in distress. A young boy at the center, strange episodes, and a house that felt like it couldn't catch its breath. Priests were called, prayers were said. Investigators arrived with notebooks and holy water. I'm not asking you to pick a side yet. I'm saying that fear pressed in first, and people did what people do when the ground feels unsteady. They looked for help. Arn was close to the family, protective by instinct, the kind who steps forward when others step back. If you listen to the accounts, there's a moment he reportedly challenged the darkness, aloud told it to come after him instead. Whether you take that literally or symbolically, it sets the tone. A story about intent, protection, and the unpredictable boomerang of things we dare. Months later came a fight with a local man, a confrontation that turned fatal and rattled the quiet of a Connecticut town. I won't dramatize it. That doesn't honor anyone involved. What matters for us is the argument that followed. Arn's defense team said he wasn't in his right mind, for reasons the law almost never entertains. They asked a secular system to weigh a spiritual claim. In headlines, it sounded simple, almost theatrical. In court, it was anything but. The judge kept the focus on evidence. The law recognizes actions, intent, state of mind, as psychiatrists can describe it. He rejected demonic possession as a legal defense. That decision didn't end the debate. It narrowed the lane. The trial moved forward on ground the statutes could actually stand on. I am mindful of the families on both sides. The loved one who didn't come home, and the young man whose worst day became his entire public identity. True crime often forgets that griefs collide. I want to hold space for both without glamorizing harm. A courtroom is a crucible. It distills messy lives into tidy questions. And real people have to live with the residue. Were paranormal investigators involved? Yes, well-known ones. They documented. They testified to what they believed they'd witnessed in earlier months. Critics called it theater. Supporters called it courage. I'm not your referee. I'm your narrator. I am showing you how a local tragedy grew ribs and learned to walk on national TV because mystery sells and certainty rarely does. The defense leaned on the idea that forces beyond Arn's control had bent his will. The prosecution argued a simpler line. Choices, heat of the moment, consequences that can't be That's the duel in most courts: complicated stories versus clean statutes. I respect the law's need for clarity. I also respect that humans are rarely as tidy as closing arguments. Eventually the jury landed on manslaughter. The sentence was years, not life, and Arn served only a portion before parole. I'm not here to tally time like a scoreboard. I'm here to note that even in a case wrapped in the supernatural, the result looked familiar. Accountability expressed in years in supervision, with space for rehabilitation built into the frame. What do I think? I think belief is powerful, but courtrooms don't weigh belief. They weigh proof. The gap between those two is where this case still lives. Some say it proved nothing except that people will try anything to avoid blame. Others say it revealed how unprepared we are to discuss altered states without mockery. I say the truth is probably more complicated. Let's rewind to the atmosphere before the incident. There were months of disturbances, prayers, and exhausted adults trying to keep a kid safe. Whether you lean medical or spiritual, you recognize the exhaustion. Crisis makes families porous. Doors that would usually stay shut swing open for helpers, experts, and sometimes cameras. That openness has a cost. Arn's reputation before the fight mattered to people who knew him. Steady, devoted, protective. That contrast with the worst day created a story vacuum. Nature hates a vacuum. Media loves one. Into that empty space poured theories. Possession, psychosis, stress, alcohol, cosmic bad luck. I resist tidy bows. Good storytelling admits when the file won't close cleanly. The phrase "devil made me do it" was in Arn's courtroom line as much as it was a headline S crown. It stuck because it's sticky, not because it's legally precise. The judge didn't allow that defense, full stop. Still, the title carved itself into the culture, and once a case gets a name like that, it stops being just paper. It becomes folklore with footnotes. I keep a soft spot for first responders in stories like this, officers, medics, counselors, people who walk into the aftershock and turn chaos into steps. They don't get movie arcs, they get paperwork and interrupted dinners. If we credit courage, let's credit the kind that restores order without asking for applause. Quiet bravery keeps towns from spinning. One lesson I take: language matters. If you call something possession, you create one set of responses. If you call it an acute mental health crisis, you create another. The labels steer who gets invited into the room and what tools they bring. In this case, the room held priests, investigators, attorneys, and doctors. That tells you how tangled the script became. People ask me if I believe in the paranormal. I believe people experience things they can't explain, and I believe the human brain is both a radio and a storm. Those truths can coexist. The courtroom, though, has to pick a lane. It did. It asked for evidence it could measure and made its decision there. You can disagree with the frame, but the frame was clear. Another takeaway: protection can curdle into provocation. If Arn truly issued a challenge to darkness, I understand the instinct. Step in, shield the kid. But daring the void is a cinematic solution with real-world risks, even metaphorically. Sometimes the bravest line isn't "take me," but "everyone leave, get help, and lock the door behind you." The case changed how the public saw the investigators tied to it. To fans, it confirmed a lifetime of warnings. To critics, it looked like branding strapped to tragedy. Both reactions can live in one timeline. What I choose is a middle path. Borrow the caution, question the theatrics, and refuse to turn a victim or a defendant into a franchise mascot. Let's talk about faith and law. Faith speaks in testimony and symbols. Law speaks in statutes and standards of proof. They aren't enemies, they're neighbors with different toolkits. When the two collide, confusion thrives. The judge's refusal to allow a possession defense wasn't an attack on belief. It was a guardrail to keep trials from turning into sermons. Think about the jurors, regular people who had to sleep at night with whatever they decided. They weren't tasked with solving the supernatural. They were tasked with sorting facts, motives, and responsibility. That's heavy. Jurors are the civic equivalent of spine. Quiet, load-bearing, rarely thanked. Their job is hard even when the lights flicker. The victim's name deserves respect, even if I don't repeat it here to avoid turning pain into content. A life was lost. A community changed. That's the anchor. If your interest in this story ever drifts too far from that center, tug the line. True horror without empathy is just noise, and noise is the one thing the world already has in surplus. Arn's life didn't end with the verdict. There was parole, work, a relationship that held steady through headlines. People can be more than their worst chapters. That's why parole exists. Redemption isn't a trick door. It's a hallway of small choices, repeated. I know that sounds unglamorous. Good? Safety usually is. Steady is the hero we underrate. Media specials revisited the case again and again, each time arranging the puzzle pieces into a slightly different picture. That's what edits do. They tilt emphasis. If you watch those shows, keep your skepticism handy. Ask what's being left out to make the music land. Ask who benefits from a particular angle. Curiosity is the friend of your sleep. I am careful with this next part. The boy at the case's beginning grew up. He had to live beyond the role fear wrote for him. That's reason enough to avoid reenactments that treat his suffering like a prop. We can learn without reliving. We can name the storm without playing thunder on loop. Responsible storytelling keeps tomorrow in the room. If you're wondering whether the case changed the law, it didn't rewrite statutes. It did, however, expand the cultural imagination of what a defense could claim even if rejected. That alone explains its staying power. The phrase lives rent-free because it asks a question no codebook can answer. Where does responsibility end when belief takes the wheel? I tend to land here. Accountability and compassion can coexist. You can hold someone responsible and still hold space for the context that made the day combustible. That's not softness, that's maturity. Courts handle the first part. Communities handle the second. If both do their jobs, fewer tragedies become legends with catchy, misleading titles. For parents and mentors, the case offers a simple practice. Check in early, especially when a young person's world starts shrinking to one explanation for everything. Whether that explanation is spiritual doom or total cynicism, extremes are lonely. Invite variety back in routine. Exercise, art, rest. Boredom is safer than obsession, dressed as purpose. If you're a creator like me, remember we can cover darkness without feeding it. No slow-motion reenactments of grief. No breathless tours of crime scenes. We can prioritize consent, verify details, and center the living. Views bought with someone else's trauma are too expensive. Choose awe and inquiry over shock. Audiences can feel the difference. The town, for its part, learned to speak two languages. respect for private faith, and adherence to public law. That bilingualism is healthy. It lets neighbors disagree about the unseen while agreeing on how to behave when harms occur. You don't need the same metaphysics to share a sidewalk. You need shared rules and the will to stay human. One image stays with me: a courtroom bench at dusk, empty, quiet, the air still humming with things said and unsaid. Justice is slower than television. It wears paper and patience. In cases like this, the slowness is mercy. It forces everyone to use words with care and to separate what they feel from what they can responsibly prove. Did sensational coverage amplify the legend? Absolutely. But we don't have to add volume. We can add nuance, timelines, context. The ordinary days that framed the one extraordinary one. Nuance isn't clicky, but it travels further. It asks the difference between a story you regret at midnight and a story that helps you make a kinder choice tomorrow. Another lesson I keep: avoid dares to the dark, literal or metaphorical. Humility is underrated protection. You don't lose bravery by refusing to pick fights with the unknown. You gain nights of sleep. If a situation is above your pay grade, say so, and call people whose toolkit fits the problem. Courage delegates, ego auditions for trouble. Some people see this case as proof that evil wears a suit and speaks fluent human. Others see it as a cautionary tale about suggestion and stress. I see a Venn diagram with a messy overlap labeled "We don't know." That overlap is not a failure. It's an honest room. If we spend more time there, we treat each other better when the lights flicker. Law students still read about this trial because it asks a clean way to discuss messy ideas. Men's culpability. Theology students read it for a different reason. Modern folklore pressed against the edges of belief. When two disciplines study the same day from opposite ends, you know the story hit a nerve worth examining. People ask whether headlines like this inspire copycats. My answer is that responsible framing lowers that risk. When we emphasize consequences, healing, and the ordinary human cost, spectacle loses its shine. The goal isn't to bury the story, it's to deglamorize the worst minute, so it stops auditioning as a shortcut to meaning for the desperate. Behind every infamous case are small, quiet acts. Neighbors dropping off casseroles, employers holding a job, counselors showing up on time. Those acts don't trend, but they repair the social net. If you're ever tempted to think only myths move people, look at a healed family dinner table. That's the kind of miracle I sign my name under. Where do I land? Finally. The phrase is powerful branding. The day was a tragedy. The verdict was the system doing what it knows how to do. I can respect the mystery people felt without handing mystery the keys. My rule of thumb: believe experiences, test explanations, and keep consequences in focus. That three-part lens keeps my feet on the floor. If you came here hoping for a smoking gun that proves or disproves the supernatural, I won't pretend I have it. What I have is a caution. Don't let labels do your thinking. Whether you shout demon or delusion, ask the next question. Always the next question. That habit won't make you famous, but it will make you trustworthy at 2 a.m. There's a grace in communities that move forward without denial. You can honor private beliefs, accept a public verdict, and still treat everyone like a neighbor. That's grown-up civic life. The alternative is to make every courthouse a battlefield for metaphysics. We tried that in history. It doesn't end well, and it doesn't feed children. I want the last stretch to center the survivor principle. Even in stories without a single living victim at the moment of harm, there are survivors, families, friends, first responders. When we tell the tale, we owe them care. That means no lurid detail, no ghoulish giggle. It means choosing words like a surgeon chooses instruments. To heal, not to impress. Arndt's case also spotlights rehabilitation. He served, he worked, he married, he kept a low profile. Whether you cheer or bristle at that, the point is simple. Society bets big on the idea that people can change. If we don't believe that parole makes no sense, I choose to believe it, with clear eyes and seatbelts. Hope needs hardware. As for me, I carry this story as a reminder to be careful with vows said in anger or fear. Words have ways of echoing. When you're exhausted, hand your mouth a timeout and hand the moment to someone steadier. Protectors don't have to be martyrs. The bravest sentence can be, "I need help," followed closely by "Let S leave now." Let's also credit defense attorneys who take hard cases without demonizing anyone. Their work tests the system, and a tested system is stronger. You can disagree with a strategy and still appreciate the constitutional backbone it flexes. Rights aren't real until they work for people you dislike or for people whose explanations you doubt. If you've stuck with me this far, thank you. You've practiced slow attention, the skill that keeps stories from driving your car. Slow attention is how we honor the real dead and support the very living. It's also how we sleep. After episodes like this, sleep is both medicine and verdict. It says, we told it carefully, and lets the house breathe. Would I cover a case like this again? Yes, but only with the same guardrails. Center the human cost. Separate belief from proof, and don't hand the microphone to the loudest theory. Loud is cheap. Careful is rare. Rare lasts. If my channel stands for anything, let it be that true horror becomes true wisdom, before the credits roll. Practical takeaways before we close. Teach kids how narratives recruit them. Model calm questions under pressure, and set household norms that make asking for help normal. If your gut says a situation is getting weird, you don't need permission to step out. Safety first, then theory. Theories can wait. People can't. Back to that headline, catchy, immortal, a little unfair. It makes a complex day sound like a slogan. I won't pretend slogans can't move crowds. They can, but they can't hold grief, context, or accountability. That's our job. If we must carry a phrase from this case, let it be quieter. Don't play brave with forces you don't understand. The judge's ruling to exclude possession as a defense will keep echoing in law schools. It's a bright line that prevents trials from becoming theology debates. You may dislike the line, but lines are how systems avoid chaos. We draw them to keep the ship steerable in storms. When the sea is myth, a straight keel matters even more. I'll close where I started. Belief and proof live in different houses. When they visit each other politely, communities thrive. When they try to evict each other, everyone sleeps poorly. This case didn't solve that tension, it just put a lamp on it. I plan to keep that lamp lit curious, compassionate, and cautious whenever I tell stories like this. Thank you for walking this careful path with me. If the last story warned about internet myth, this one reminds us that courtrooms can't carry every kind of truth. Our job, off camera, is to keep people safe while we argue about the unseen. Hold each other close, hold claims lightly, and hold the door open for better conversations. From a courtroom wrestling with belief, I'm steering us to a quieter, colder, dread the empty fields of Plainfield, where the Ed Gein case reshaped how America imagines horror, and how I choose to tell it. After the courtroom tightrope of Arn Johnson, I want to step into a very different kind of dread, the lonely fields of Plainfield, Wisconsin, where a quiet man named Ed Gein rewired America's idea of horror. This isn't a gore tour. It's a careful walk through context, impact, and the lessons I think are worth keeping. I'm keeping this respectful and monetization safe. No grisly detail, no shock bait. Instead, I'll trace how isolation, grief, and obsession can ferment into something the whole town feels. If horror is a mirror, the Gein story shows what happens when a mirror is left too long in a cold, empty house. Gein grew up under a strict, controlling mother and a distant father. The family's farm sat like an island, wintered by silence. I'm not excusing crimes. I'm mapping the atmosphere. Loneliness can echo. If no one helps you name the echo, you might start answering it backhand. That's where stories go crooked. Neighbors remembered Ed as shy, helpful, almost invisible. That contrast. Politic stereo troubled interiors why filmmakers still circle this case. It's the uncanny mishmash that disturbed America. A face you'd trust to fix a hinge hiding a storm no one heard until it broke the fence. That contrast still unsettles me, and it's why this story lingers long after the screen goes dark. When his mother died, the house became a mausoleum for memory. Rooms closed, clocks kept time for someone who wasn't coming back. The grief didn't soften, it calcified. I don't think grief makes monsters. I think unattended grief attracts them, the way an abandoned property attracts weather. I keep that in mind as I narrate, because restraint is how we earn trust when topics get heavy. The small town setting matters. Plainfield wasn't prepared for the scale of the revelations. Rural communities protect their own, and that instinct made the shock sharper. The story wasn't just about one man. It was about a town learning its neighbor had been living in midnight for years. It's a sober note, but I'd rather be careful than clever when real lives sit behind the headlines. I'll keep victim focus front and center without names or detail. Real people were harmed. Families lost love that never comes back. Whenever this story gets told like a campfire dare, I step back. On my channel, empathy is non-negotiable. We can learn without turning pain into a prop. Small choices in language matter here. The goal is clarity without cruelty, context without spectacle. Investigators eventually uncovered evidence that went far beyond theft or deception. I'm not listing items, I'm noting impact. Seasoned officers stepped outside for air. That reaction, to me, says enough. Sometimes the most ethical storytelling choice is to let silence hold the heaviness. Remember, I'm tracing patterns, not hunting shock. Curiosity with compassion is the channel's promise. Why does this case loom so large? Because it changed pop culture. Writers minded to craft Norman Bates, Leatherface, and a certain moth-obsessed killer. Each character is fiction, but the seed was Plainfield. That lineage is a warning. Storytellers borrow weather, they don't have to reproduce the storm. There's a myth that monstrous acts arrive with thunder. In reality, they often arrive with chores, errands, and quiet routines that keep neighbors calm. That's the terror. Harm hiding inside ordinary. I'm not asking you to be paranoid. I'm asking you to honor the power of paying gentle attention. Let's talk psychology in broad strokes. Obsession paired with isolation can build a private world that rewards choices the public rejects. If your only feedback loop is your own echo, the loop will bless anything. That's not a diagnosis. It's a nudge toward the value of community and care. Money and means mattered too. A failing farm, odd jobs, a life that shrank instead of expanded, pressure that never vents has to go somewhere. In healthier stories, it becomes art or mentorship. Here, it folded inward. When I say safety nets save lives, this is the kind of absence I'm picturing. Police work in Plainfield turned into trauma work overnight. Evidence teams had to move carefully, document thoroughly, and then go home to families who needed dinner like always. That dissonance is real. If we praise heroism, let's include the kind that files, photographs, and keeps its humanity. I'm intentionally vague about Discovery Day. The facts are public. The images are not welcome here. What matters for us is the ripples. A shuttered farmhouse, court dates, headlines, and a nation suddenly aware that terror didn't need a city to bloom. Cornfields, it turned out, could grow nightmares too. Reporters swarmed. Some wrote with care, others invented spice. Sensationalism sells, but it also scars. I try to counter that by choosing verbs that don't wound the living. If a sentence earns a gasp at the cost of dignity, I delete it. Horror can teach without humiliating the classroom. That's the compass I use. Center people, zoom out for systems, and refuse to trade empathy for clicks. Gein confessed to murders and to violating graves. I'll leave it there. At that altitude, the legal process moved from shock to structure. Charges, assessments, and evaluations that asked whether prison or psychiatric care best protected the public. Systems grind, but they grind for a reason. I return to that idea a lot here, because sustainability in storytelling starts with respect. He was eventually committed to a secure hospital, later moved, and lived many years under supervision. That our containment, treatment, oversight won't satisfy everyone, but it reflects a society trying to be safe and sane at the same time. Justice isn't only bars. Sometimes it's locked doors plus medicine. Pop culture kept circling the farm. Movie scripts changed names and details, turning truth into parable. I don't mind the fiction when it's honest about being fiction. What I resist is the wink that treats real tragedy like a starter pack for villains you can buy on a poster. People loved those people, remember that. What do I, personally, take from this story? First, respect for boundaries your own and others. Second, gratitude for mental health pros who walk into rooms most of us avoid. Third, a commitment to tell these histories without turning them into themed entertainment. We can be curious and still be kind. I also think about how communities recover. Plainfield held auctions, cleared the house, tried to reclaim ordinary. That's resilience at work, a town choosing sunrise tasks after a long night. Recovery is housekeeping with a soul-sweeping repainting, planting small motions that say, this is still our place. Let's address the folklore. Ghost tours, macabre souvenirs, the whole carnival that tries to set up shop after a tragedy. I won't judge folks coping with humor, but on my watch, we don't make a brand out of other people's worst chapters. If curiosity needs merch, I'm not your channel. Holding that tone isn't flashy, but it's how we learn something usable by the time the credits roll. When people ask about motive, I offer humility. Some acts don't fit in clean boxes. Control, grief, fantasy, obsession, the ingredients swirl. The point isn't to solve a puzzle for applause. It's to build better railings, so similar storms have fewer options next time. Prevention beats perfect explanations. I'm careful not to make the mother the villain of the origin story. Parenting can wound, yes, but millions survive strict homes without harming anyone. This isn't math, it's weather. Conditions raise risk, choices decide outcomes. That nuance keeps us from scapegoating while still learning patterns. If that feels calm for a horror channel, good calm is how we steer through the fog without crashing. The farm setting turns into metaphor fast. Outbuildings like compartments, fields like empty pages, winter like a soundproof booth. Isolation romanticizes easily in movies. Real isolation quotes. If you've got a neighbor who's sinking into silence, check in. Curiosity can be life-saving, not nosy. The case also reframed, nice for me. Polite isn't proof of harmless. Community needs more than smiles. It needs visibility friends who notice when routines tilt, store clerks who clock concern, teachers who ask the second question. Safety is social. It's made of small, boring interventions. Lawyers, judges, doctors H group had to translate their ethics onto a stage built for headlines. Clinical language met tabloid appetite, and I'm glad the clinical side kept winning in court. Trials are for facts and safety plans, not campfire adjectives. That boundary protects everyone. It's a boundary I won't cross. We can face dark history without dimming our own hearts to do it. I won't show photos or rehearse inventories. Instead, I'll emphasize training, how investigative teams debrief, how communities memorialize victims without fetishizing harm, how filmmakers set guardrails when borrowing from life. Ethics isn't the enemy of art, it's the part that lets you sleep. If you create horror, consider the Gein lesson. Focus on dread, not damage. Atmosphere, not anatomy. The scariest shots are often empty rooms that imply choices, not close-ups that punish the audience. You don't need to reenact harm to explore it. Suggestion is respectful, and frankly, more effective. There's a temptation to say, evil, full stop. I understand it, but labels can lock doors we still need to open for understanding. I prefer describing the forces. Isolation, fixation, ritualized control. Those are things we can interrupt in people we love, long before a headline happens. I'm asking us to sit with the discomfort, not to amplify it. The difference is everything. Plainfield sits on maps as a small dot with a heavy shadow. I try to picture it at sunrise. School buses, diner coffee, a hardware store that still knows your name. The town is more than a case file. Reducing it to a punchline is lazy. Communities deserve their full story, not just their worst moment. I sometimes hear, why tell this at all? Because silence protects nothing. It only relocates risk. But the how matters. We can name harms and still center humanity. We can study patterns while refusing to cosplay the pain. That's the middle path my channel walks firm steps. Soft voice. Gein's house famously burned after the sale. People still argue about accident versus arson. I won't romanticize the fire. Flames don't heal. They only hide. Healing is paperwork, therapy, neighbors mowing lawns for each other, and 1,000 Tuesdays that don't make the news. Collectors sometimes chase artifacts with a morbid glow. I get the instinct to touch history, but some histories don't belong on shelves. Museums that teach context are one thing. Living rooms that turn tragedy into are another. Choose reverence over novelty. The difference matters. That tension between curiosity and cares. Where I want this conversation to live. The case influenced how police handle rural missing person reports. Patterns that once felt impossible in small towns became thinkable, which made training sharper. Preparedness is grief paid forward into safety. When professionals get better, the past's worst days buy someone else a chance. As for mental health, this story reminds me to notice when someone's world shrinks to one room, one voice, one ritual. Expansion is medicine. Community, routine, sunlight, questions. If a friend starts answering only to their echo, interrupt with a walk, a meal, an errand that reopens the map. I'll never say entertainment caused crimes. Causation is a lazy ladder here, but I will say this. Stories shape expectations, and expectations shape thresholds. If you binge narratives that normalize control and dehumanization, your empathy dulls. So curate your diet. Curiosity deserves clean fuel. The victims deserve to be remembered for their lives, not their last minutes. That's why I avoid names here. Not erasure, but protection from search engine afterlives they didn't choose. If you know those names, say them with care offline. Online, let's keep the frame on lessons, not lurid lore. The legal outcome hospitalization rather than standard prison sparks debate. Even today, my take is simple. The safest path. 1. Society got distance and supervision. Professionals got time to assess. The public got fewer theatrics. Boring solutions are often the most durable shields. Gein died decades ago, but the narrative keeps touring like a band that won't retire. My job isn't to sell tickets, it's to manage noise. If you leave this video with your empathy intact and your appetite for gore reduced, I've done the job I came here to do. It's a boundary I won't cross. We can face dark history without dimming our own hearts to do it. I think about the shop owners who had to answer tourists' questions, the pastors who ran out of words, the teachers who calmed classrooms. They're the unsung chorus in every headline opera. If you want heroes, look for the people who keep routines humane when everything tries to break. I'm asking us to sit with the discomfort, not to amplify it. The difference is everything. Writers sometimes ask me how to adapt this material ethically. Here's my short list. Fictionalize details. Foreground consent. Invent victims rather than borrowing real grief. And consult experts. If your set needs a moment of silence before rolling, you're probably doing something right. There's a caution here about nostalgia for simpler times. Plainfield was quiet, but quiet didn't mean safe. I don't chase nostalgia, I chase transparency. Give communities, resources, education, and a habit of gentle nosiness. Sunlight is better policy than slogans about good old days. When people laugh nervously at this case, I get it. Dark humor is a pressure valve, but I steer the room back to compassion. Laughter shouldn't cost someone else their peace. If the joke leaves the vulnerable smaller, it's not a valve, it's a leak. We patch leaks here. That's the compass I use. Center people, zoom out for systems, and refuse to trade empathy for clicks. If you're tempted to deep dive photos or crime scene inventories, pause. Ask what you'll gain that a summary can't give. Most of the time, the answer is adrenaline, not wisdom. Trade the click for a call to someone you love. Let your nervous system stand down and your judgment stand up. The geography matters. Long winters, early nights, big skies that make a person feel small. None of that explains anything, but it seasons the tale, places a character. In stories like this, the land's silence sometimes collaborates not with intent, but with indifference. That's chilling enough. I wonder how many red flags neighbors second-guessed later, small oddities dismissed because accusing feels cruel. I'm not telling you to snoop. I'm telling you to check in. Asking twice is kindness, not judgment. If something feels off, a second hello can be a safety line. I return to that idea a lot here, because sustainability in storytelling starts with respect. On my channel, we exit true horror with practical ballast. So here it is. Learn the names of your neighbors, support local mental health resources, and practice the art of interrupting isolation. None of that is flashy. All of it is how you keep tomorrow from borrowing last century's nightmares. The farmhouse is gone, but the lesson stays. Landscapes don't commit crimes, people do. Shaped by choices, warped by loneliness, sometimes failed by systems. If we want fewer monsters in stories, we need more mentors in real life. Mentors beat monsters. That's my bias and my bet. I'll close without drum rolls. Ed Gein's name doesn't need more volume. Victims deserve more quiet. Let's leave this tale with our empathy sharpened and our curiosity disciplined. If you learned something here, pass along the humane version at your next conversation. That's how we rewrite the echo. Thank you for walking this careful path with me. Next, I want to return to the supernatural side, not to sensationalize, but to compare how folklore and fact trade masks in American horror. Bring your questions and your boundaries. We'll need both to keep the lights on while we look. So what ties a haunted doll, an online myth, a courtroom plea, and a quiet neighbor together? The same key. Attention is fuel, and boundaries are safety. Annabelle says don't invite, Slender Man says don't follow. The court says bring proof. Plainfield whispers notice the quiet. If this helped you carry that key into every scary story, stick around. I've got more told with respect, no gore, and real takeaways. Subscribe, drop your thoughts, and share this with the friend who clicks at midnight.